why did I struggle so much? Why couldn't I have just said, like, yes, child-free is for me. This is the path I want to go down. Well, I think a lot of it has to do with programming in terms of what I was led to believe a good woman should be and do.
I'm Keltie Maguire, and you're listening to the Kids Are Child-Free podcast.
Hello, and you are listening to the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. I'm your host, Keltie Maguire, and today we are listening to part 2 of a 2-part episode that I've recorded for you all about my child-free story, and namely how I arrived at the decision to stay child-free after many years of ambivalence and indecision and sitting on the fence about whether or not I wanted to have kids or stay child-free. If you have not already listened to part 1 of 2, which aired a few days ago, I'd really encourage you to go back and listen to that, as it helps set the stage for what I'm about to share today, where we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of how I made this decision, all of the stuff that came up around this choice for me emotionally, in terms of all of the pressures I felt, and how I ultimately finally figured out that I wanted to, in fact, stay child-free. We're going to go to 2009. So I moved back from Sydney, Australia. Big reason for that is that my dad still at this point was in the hospital. I think he had moved from intensive care to the spinal cord unit. It was about a year in total before he was able to go home, only to have to live with 24/7 care. So this was, like, again, very, very dire medical situation my dad was in. And I'm always both overjoyed when I hear situations in terms of people breaking their neck or their back and fully recovering, but a bit of heartache, because that unfortunately was not the nature of this accident or this situation. So I moved back to Canada. Within about a month or two, I met this fantastic guy, my now husband, Chris. And all I can tell you about Chris, where it concerns potential parenthood or fatherhood, is that, like, man, he would be an incredible father. I hope, or would like to think, that we all feel this way about our partners, but he is just such a wonderful guy. He is such a nurturing partner. He is in touch with himself, I guess, in an emotional sense, in ways that I don't think my father was ever able to be. So, we talk about dating people who sometimes like our father. I suppose some of my dad's characteristics might be in Chris, but I see Chris as someone who, for whatever reason, was able to, like, evolve or embody himself in a different kind of way. I'm sure a lot of that is generational, circumstantial, cultural. And now it's like, why am I talking about comparing my dad to my father to my husband? But yeah, I guess they say these early relationships have bearing on who we choose as our partner. Chris has a lot of nieces and nephews. And when we met at that point, he only had one niece. But now, between both of our families, I'm doing the math real quickly, I think we've got 7 nieces and nephews, 6 on his side, 1 on my side. So there was never a question in my mind as far as whether Chris would be a dad. And I would say, from pretty early on in a relationship, being very serious and within pretty short order talking about, like, me moving to Germany at some point, and us deciding then at the end of that first year together, moving in together. We always talked about having kids at some point, but in really loose, kind of jokey terms. And it was always something for later. Now, I had just turned 27 when I met him, and I didn't feel a burning urgency to have kids. And I would say it was only probably a couple of years after we met that friends of ours started to have kids. I, of course, had a couple of friends who had kids, but it was, like, more into the early 30s that people I knew started having kids. And seeing my friends start having kids was, as it is, I think, for most people, an interesting transition, because people's lives and priorities and those relationships can shift and change. And while on the one hand, there was a lot of excitement from me to welcome these new little people into the world, I'm a big fan of babies, as you'll probably soon learn, or you've maybe heard me talking or gushing about babies, like, big baby fan. Not every woman who has kids is a baby fan, and not everyone who doesn't have kids equally feels the same. But I know there's a lot of us who love babies. So excitement, but also this feeling of, like, wow, everything around me is changing. Everything is changing. Things will never be the same. And for a long time, I sort of chided myself as, like, am I afraid of just losing my youth? Am I not wanting to close a door on the way things were because I'm afraid of the way things now are, the way things can be? And I certainly think that's part of it. But I also think this real almost disappointment, reluctance feeling of, like, wow, another person's having a child was kind of indicative, or showing me my own lack of desire and how much I felt that put me at odds with everyone else. Now, I've been quite fortunate that I wouldn't say too many of my relationships have faced like fallout, if you will, as far as people having kids. Sure, it's changed maybe the terms in which we see each other, how often, under what circumstances, etc. But I would say virtually all of the women that have had kids that I know, they have really like robust personhoods, if you will. They're really individuals and they have identities outside of motherhood as much as that's an important role. And I will say for those of you who have friends with kids, specifically those who are really young, is it does get better and easier to connect with fellow moms and parents once the kids get a little bit older, once they require a little bit less, once mom can take a step back and have a bit of breathing room and be like, whoa, okay, this is full on having a baby or babies or toddlers. But once the kids become, let's say, school age, I have seen there's been a closeness that's developed again with a lot of my friendships. So where do we go from here? Chris and I have been together for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. I'm getting close to 30. I'm 31. I'm thinking, do I want to have kids? Do we want to have kids? I don't remember us having concrete discussions as far as it concerning us having kids, although the idea was like, yes, it would be us jointly having kids. But I remember me personally really asking myself, do I want to be a mom? And putting it off and putting it off. And I became so consumed with this. I was going in so many circles. I was like, I don't know if I did literal pros and cons lists, but like pros and cons lists in my head and how do I feel and checking in and ups and downs and lots of self-judgment. What's wrong with me? Why don't I want with this? I'm with this incredible guy. You know, we're now in our early 30s. Eventually I said to myself, just be okay with not knowing. And let's just table this for now. Table it until 35. This was the age I came up with. And the reason being is that we often hear, and the number that's stated to us so often as women is that at about 35, our fertility starts to wane. And I thought, I'm going to push this out as far as I can. And what happened? I turned 35 and I still didn't know. And I still didn't know if this was what I wanted. And I'm just trying to rewind right now, it being 2024. If we were to go back to, so I'm 41 now, and I think I forgot to mention this earlier, 41 now. So this is about 6 years ago. Yeah, it's close to around the time that I moved to Germany. So let's talk about that. Chris and I always knew we'd move to Germany at some point, and life in Vancouver was very good. At this point, I had left my job. I was working in sales, and I ultimately left that job for a business I'd been nurturing for a number of years, which was designing jewelry. I had my own product-based business. And I have to say, life in Vancouver was very good. We were living in Vancouver. We'd been there for the entirety of the, at this point, 9 or so years that we'd been together. And what we saw is that, yes, life is good and we have hobbies and interests and we're out in the mountains and we now had our dog. And yet it seemed like we were standing still and everything was sort of changing around us. We saw, well, I can remember one weekend, I think we came back from a trip to Bali and we had not one, but two of our closest couple friends, two different couples who lived in our neighborhood tell us that they were moving about 40 minutes to an hour outside the city. And of course, appreciating that when people start having children, which at this point both of them did, that it's costly and most people want more space and affordability is really challenging in Vancouver. And yet us also feeling like, wow, okay, things are starting to change. And this kept happening, people announcing more kids and people deciding to leave. And we saw how much less frequently we were seeing people as a result of their decisions. I also saw women I knew who had previously been fairly indifferent or like, I don't really know if I want to have a kid. I'm not sure. I'm not so into it. Them having the pregnancy announcements as well. And for me, it almost felt like this sort of futile sort of certainty. It was something that I couldn't deny that ultimately, whether I wanted it or not, I would become a mom because that's just what women do. And so Chris and I looked at life and how it was going. And we looked at some circumstances with his family. Both of his parents had their respective health issues going on in the previous couple of years. And we said, let's move. You know, it was really this feeling of us deciding to do something and actually enact our own change for our lives rather than seeing everything kind of swirling around us and us feeling stagnant. So we decided to move to Germany. And this is 2018, April 2018. And when we came here, I can only say it was, and this sounds crazy because it was such a big move, but it was just such a smooth transition, and it felt so good being here. And our plan was to move here for 2 or 3 years, but we've been here almost 6 now, and we are just very happy living in Europe. It suits us very well. We're very fortunate here in Germany in terms of all the social support that you get and the infrastructure. We have all of these incredible cities and countries just sort of within our backyard or within really quick flying distance. And we've met some really wonderful people here, some of whom are parents, many of whom are not. And so it's been a really positive change for us. And with that move, I also ended up having and making a really big business move about a year after moving here, which was to change my business. And with that change, and I'll fast forward through that transition, though if you're interested, maybe what I'll do is I'll include a link in the show notes to an episode on a different podcast I have, which is all about getting business and life clarity, and talk about why I closed this business and what that move and change was all about. But ultimately, I started a new service-based business where I was now helping people get clarity and direction and make decisions about their lives. Because I saw for myself that this idea of what I wanted for myself professionally and even life-wise had changed since I'd started my last business, and I wanted something different. And so I'm doing all this work. I'm helping people connect with what they want and how they want the future to look and what really lights them up and what parts of business and life are draining them. And alongside that, and this now timeline's 2019, 2010, 2020, I'm thinking like, I have to make a decision about this kids thing. I mean, when we moved to Germany, I thought, okay, if we stay in Germany for a year or 2 years, then maybe we could I was still sort of thinking like, would I get pregnant ideally at the end of that time and then we'd move back here? Or maybe I'd have an infant in Germany and I could have maybe my mom come over for some support and then we could go back to Canada. But it was really eating away at me. And I thought, I have to make a decision about this. And fortunately or unfortunately, Chris was little help. And the reason for that is he was really, truly indifferent, ambivalent. I would push him and say, like, do you want to become a dad? And he's like, I honestly, I'm really open to either. And he said, I feel like you need to make this decision though. And it made me so frustrated and almost mad because it's like I wanted him to tell me what he wanted and what he wanted to do. And yet Chris's belief, and we'll talk about this when he comes on the podcast next season. It's like cliffhanger. I'm making you wait until later in the spring or early summer. But he knew that this was such and is such a personal and individual choice. And he did not want to exert pressure on me one way or the other. And truly, he was and is and now I'm very happy not to have kids, but like ambivalent in his choice. And he's like, I can't and don't want to push you either way because ultimately, like, you are becoming a mom. And he's like, let's face it. And I just want to preface this by saying Chris and I have like an incredibly, I would say, egalitarian, equal partnership relationship. We both take part in all the things. And so I didn't have doubt that he wouldn't be able to like show up and support me as a mom, but he's like, you're the one carrying the child and having the baby. And it's just that different kind of relationship with the mom. And so he did not want me to have any sort of resentment because there would be, let's say, a pressure of me thinking like, okay, I guess I need to do this. I want to do this because you want to do this. And yeah, he just really encouraged me to do my own soul searching. And again, like, I was so mad about it. I was like, just tell me what to do. And it also made me kind of mad that he thought I would be someone who would have a child and then be mad about it or be resentful of that child or resentful of him. But now being on the other side of this decision, I think there's some truth in that. I really do. And so it was insightful and very astute of him to give me that space to decide. And so I got really fed up and I was like, okay, I can't deal with this. I can't figure this out. And I decided I think talking about this probably in therapy. I'd had various counselors and therapists over my adult life. I decided to hire a life coach. It was somebody here in Munich that came recommended to me. And we had a few sessions together. And I just remember, I think it must have been in the first session. And I'll mention she didn't specialize in this decision, but she was someone that was recommended as a good life coach. I remember how deflated I felt when she talked to me about the fact that she had become a late in life mom. I think she was probably in her mid 40s when she had her son. And I remember being like, oh, even you, my coach, ultimately ended up having kids. And again, it's like, it was funny because there was no pressure from her for me to become a mom. And she talked about the fact that she believed she could have had a really fulfilling life either way. But again, it was just this feeling of like, this is just my destiny. This is the best way to describe it. This is my destiny as a woman. And no matter what, this is the thing I'm going to have to do. Sidebar. And this is just a story I wanted to tell. I'd noted down and I haven't shared it, but I remember when Chris and I used to go running in the, it's called Pacific Spirit Park in Vancouver. Shout out to my Vancouverites who also love Pacific Spirit Park. We used to go running in the park. And I can remember like very distinctly on one or two occasions running through the park and thinking, okay, if I was to be pregnant, let's say next summer around this time, let's say I'm running on a nice summer evening, that means I couldn't be doing this. And I mean, okay, arguably you can run when you're pregnant. Many health practitioners say, specifically if you ran before. But it was this feeling of like, I'm not going to be able to do this anymore. And then maybe a few months after that, I could do this with a stroller. But then, it was like, I kept kind of doing the math and thinking about if I'm pregnant, then that'll mean I can't do this then. And it was like, I was only seeing things as far as the losses. There was no feeling of excitement like, yeah, and then I'll be a mom and then life's going to be different, but it's still going to be great. I didn't feel that at all. So again, I think that's really interesting and somewhat telling that I had these feelings. All right, you want to know what is almost, but not quite worse than feeling totally angst-ridden and indecisive about whether or not to have kids? It's other people and their questions about when are you going to have kids? Or what do you mean you're not sure? Of course you're going to have kids. These kinds of questions and comments can make things that much muddier when it comes to getting clarity on whether or not kids are right for you. That's why I created my Kids or Child-Free Response Guide. It is a free guide with 25 different ways that you can answer the question, so when are you going to have kids? When the answer is, I really don't know. You can find that guide either in the show notes for today's episode or at kidsorchildfree.com under the free resources tab. All right, so back to the future, or I should say back to 2020. I'm seeing this coach, and we had a few sessions, and I would say, she didn't have a particular process around this in terms of helping me make this decision, but we had some interesting conversations. And I kind of just got to a point after a few sessions where I recognized at that point there were some books on the topic. And at this point, I just thought like, I'm kind of fed up. And it wasn't like that in that moment made the decision, but I almost was just tired of like banging my head against the wall trying to make this decision. And yet anytime I thought about having a child, I just thought, no, like it was this full body, no, I don't want that. And yet I still struggled to come to terms with being a child-free person. So why was that? Why did I struggle so much? Why couldn't I have just said like, yes, child-free is for me. This is the path I want to go down. Well, I think a lot of it has to do with programming in terms of what I was led to believe a good woman should be and do. And as mentioned, all of the examples in my life, what I saw growing up, what I saw amongst friends and family is like, you have children. Specifically, if you're in a position like I am or was, is that I'm in this incredible long-term relationship. We've got a really good partnership. He's a man who would be an incredible father. We're well-educated. We are thoughtful. We're conscientious individuals. We'd arguably be great parents. Like we are supposed to have children. And I think I internalized so many of these ideas. And I found myself saying things like, you're so unfeminine. What's wrong with you? And legitimately questioning if there was something wrong with me. Like maybe I should get my hormones tested. And I have struggled with hormonal issues. And I'll actually talk a little bit more about that in a second, but wondering if these things were playing into my lack of desire for a child. Okay, so let's talk about the hormonal stuff. And this is actually pertaining to a diagnosis I have, endometriosis, which if you've not heard of it, please inform yourself because there's probably people listening who have this illness condition. I'm not sure what the formal term is I should use. And if it's not you, it's probably somebody you know because they say 1 in 10 women has endometriosis. And effectively, it is when cells that are similar to those in the uterus, the endometrial lining, actually are found or migrate. They're not exactly sure how it happens in other parts of the body. So, of course, when our uterine lining builds up in order to prepare for an embryo, and then it sheds in the form of a period, that will then build up in other parts of the body where these endometrial cells are found. And so you end up with really painful like lesions and sometimes cysts and problems happening in different areas of the reproductive cavity, as well as in some cases it's been found crazy places in people's bodies. So, bowels, bladder, also lungs, eyeball. I think some people like basically your eyeball would bleed, I think, with menstruation. Okay, now I'm telling crazy horror stories, but it's extremely debilitating. It causes immense amounts of pain. It can cause very difficult periods. It can be life-threatening in some cases if it's not caught, and it can take women up to 10 years to be diagnosed. And that's my story. Through all of this ambivalence, indecision, and humming and hawing about, do I want to have kids? I was struggling with horrible pelvic pain, difficult periods, really painful ovulation. I had gone off the birth control pill. Part of the reason being is I was curious, after having been on it so long, if I could cycle normally and naturally, should we decide to have a child? And so again, like in some sense, I wasn't actively preparing. There was no timeline, but like I was definitely thinking that I would probably have a child, just not yet. What I was waiting for, I was waiting for the wanting to arrive. This is the way I describe it. I was waiting for that moment that women tell me shows up where baby mania, your hormones are going crazy, the biological clock starts ticking. It's just something you want to do it. And I'm like, where is this? What is wrong with me? Why don't I experience this? Well, I've since found out that not all women experience this. However, and not because there's anything wrong with us, but there's very many different thoughts, and we'll probably talk more about how a lot of these notions are really real for the individual, but false as far as there being actual evidence to support the fact that we do have this biological clock in the sense of like, I want to have a baby now. But that didn't happen for me. So with all of that and dealing with the health issues, I mean, first of all, it was a huge preoccupation. Second of all, feeling like I had so much pain, so much trauma. I did eventually have an operation that officially diagnosed the endometriosis. Being on different hormones, just dealing with a lot of pain, a lot of issues through, bladder pain, pelvic pain of all sorts, like just bad. It did not make me want to go through pregnancy or childbirth. I was kind of like, this area is off limits. Like I don't want to think about carrying a human down there. Second to that, I have had a lifelong back and forth struggle, we'll say, and I'm, happy I'm in a really good place right now, thanks to medication and therapy and a lot of great tactics and exercise and eating well and all these different things, but a long struggle with anxiety as well as depression. And I've gone through such immense lows that I have had to question how well equipped or fit I would be to have and raise a child should I find myself in one of these lows. And I recognize I have a great support network and I have a very supportive partner. And I know I'm in a good place and I'm sure I could cope, but it has been a question mark for me to say, I feel so often like I require so many things to be sort of in place that I need to be able to manage my sleep really well, that I need to be able to feel as much as we can in today's day and age, today's world, in control of my environment when it comes to like lots of stimulation and loud sounds and intrusions. I can give you an example. Even last night, after feeling like I've just been really go and busy the last few weeks, just having a certain kind of music on and feeling like it was too loud, I'm like feeling almost panicky. And I said to Chris, like, can you please change the music? I feel like I'm like on the brink of like losing it. And I'm able to better recognize that. But the fact is, when you have little people in your life, children, it can be really hard to manage that. And I worry, having seen myself have real like big emotional outbursts and struggled with fits of anger, if you will, I worry about what that may mean for my child and how that may negatively impact them. So these have been two other factors that have played into this decision not to have kids. Are they the main reasons? Not necessarily, but they certainly, I think, are relevant. So done these therapy sessions. I thought, oh, I could read a book. I could do this the exercise or that. And I'm just like, I'm kind of over it. And I thought, okay, let's just look at and play with this idea of really embracing not having kids and seeing how that feels. And it took, I would say, some time, probably a couple of years, a few years to get to like, I guess a couple of years, if that was 2020, a year and a half, to really feel more confident in my choice. But I started to feel more confident. And that was through a few different things. First of all, really having compassion for myself for the way I felt and for allowing myself to want or not want the things that I want. A classic example, I'm out walking my dog. I see a couple of women pushing their babies in strollers. I immediately feel like, I would not want that. That does not look like it's fun for me. Immediately the thought comes in, this chastising thought. What's wrong with you, Keltie? Why are you so judgmental? You're out for a walk with your dog. It's virtually the same thing. What's wrong with going for a walk with a friend and pushing a baby? Why is this so terrible? And things much not like less nice than that. Like, God, you're such a bitch. What's wrong with you? I started shifting these thoughts and feelings to like, hey, it's okay. It's okay if you don't want that. There's nothing wrong with feeling this way. You're totally okay to feel this way. Thoughts like being around kids and feeling overstimulated and like, I hate this. This is terrible. And I don't hate being around kids, but I also feel like I have a small threshold for the stickiness, the noise, the chaos. Again, rather than thinking, why am I so prissy? Why am I so particular? Quit being so uptight. Just thinking, hey, Keltie, you're kind of a little on the tendency to be anxious. It's okay if you don't like sticky. It's okay if you don't like loud. It's a lot. This is just how you're built. This is just your makeup. Starting to shift those thoughts, those feelings, and really come into acceptance started to make me feel okay with not having kids. As did starting to speak it out, starting to say, I am a child-free person. I am child-free by choice. I am not planning to have kids. Rather than if somebody asked me or if I was talking about it, to say, well, I'm not sure. We might have kids. Ho hum, ho hum. When we show up in the world with uncertainty and doubt, it offers people an opportunity to help us correct course. And this is well-intentioned, but I'm sure it's happened to you. You say, well, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Of course you're going to have kids. Like, don't say that. When we show up with certainty, when we show up with confidence, when we own our choices, not everyone's going to like it, but it can make an immense difference in how the world responds. I also really started to go back to that work I had done for myself and that I help my clients with around clarity and looking at what's really important to me, what my values are, how I want my life to look. And I realized that all of those things, maybe not all, but many of those things that give me so much joy and satisfaction and meaning actually are a result of or directly linked to the fact that I don't have kids, that I love to be spontaneous and like go hiking in the wilderness, in the mountains for 4 or 5 days at a time, which, spontaneous on my end. Thank you to my husband for doing immense amounts of planning. The fact that I can say, oh yeah, let's fly to Paris next weekend. Why not? And have to, yes, worry about dog sitter, but not necessarily have to have childcare. The fact that I really can do what I want, that I have a great amount of flexibility in my day, that I can have and experience a lot of quiet, that I really have an immense value and also gratitude in the fact that I am a woman who was brought up to, and I have the privilege based on who I am in this world to do the things I want, to live life on my terms, which does not mean that I don't care about and have compassion for and want to be helpful and impactful to others. Of course, I do, and this is what I'm able to do in my work. But that I also can put myself first, and it's okay. And I don't need to live a life of servitude, or, having to always consider the life of someone else, which if you're a parent, of course, you don't have to be a servant to your child, but your child and their well-being needs to take a certain amount of precedence. And I just realized, I want this life to be about me. It feels like a gift. It even maybe feels like a gift I've been given by how much my my ancestors, and looking at my mom and my grandma, my great grandma, how much they have given to and invested in others, to be able to invest in and give to myself feels like I'm a total badass. I don't know how else to describe it. I get goosebumps saying it. And it is a privilege. And it's one that so many women in our world don't have or get. And it's one I take very seriously. I think one of the biggest game changers for me, though, when it came to really cementing and giving me more confidence on my path, has been asking myself the following question. 2 questions. Number 1, what do I ultimately want in my life? And I'm going to give you a second to answer this for yourself. What do you ultimately want in your life? And I thought, I want to feel joyful and fulfilled. Now, joy to me has sort of a different tone or connotation than happiness. Joy is deeper reaching. I can feel joy despite the fact I'm going through tumultuous times in my life, for example. And fulfillment really is like, I am honoring who I am and my truth, and I'm doing things that feel good, and I have genuine connections and relationships, and I'm growing myself. This is fulfillment for me. And so I thought, I want to be joyful and fulfilled. And then my next question was, do I believe I can feel joyful and fulfilled either way, whether I have a child or children, or whether I stay child-free? And knowing the kind of person I am and my belief system in life, I really don't think that it's like, has to be one or the other. That, for example, if I would have had children, I would be doomed to misery. I thought, yeah, you know what? Having kids may not totally be the thing that I want. It may not like check the boxes so much in terms of how I want my life to look, but I do believe I could find joy and fulfillment either way. And so notice what I said there. Yes, I can be happy either way. Oof, what a load lifted in terms of feeling like I have to make this perfect choice and that if I've chosen, quote, wrong, I'm doomed to misery. But notice what else I said. Yeah, I could find joy and fulfillment with being a mom, but I recognize that the person I am, the values I have in my life, how I want my future to look, what's ultimately important to me, that it does not involve being a parent and having kids. And so it's like, okay, now I have the freedom to choose. And look, I can be happy not having kids. I can feel joyful and fulfilled. And it also seems to align most with my vision for myself and my life and who I am. All right, I think I want to stop that right here. There's of course different parts of the story, and I'll probably share some of them in future, but this feels like an appropriate time to wrap up. Deciding to be child-free or deciding to have kids is a journey, and we will learn to lean into and embrace and find, I guess, contentment and decisiveness in whatever path we choose. But it's so often after we decide. We can't always get to those feelings and those experiences before we've made a choice. And so for me, deciding when I was like 98% sure I didn't want to have kids, that I wanted to stay child-free, has allowed me then to grow more confidence each and every day. And listen, I'm like a pretty pragmatic person. I really don't expect or hope or plan or want to have children at this stage. I'm 42 in May. I'm quite happy with the way life is. But I'm also somebody who's always left that little like percentage up to chance. So like, I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, trust me when I say we're taking precautions and we have no plans to have kids, but leaving the future up to possibility, and that maybe a child may enter my life and be my child in some way, shape, or form. It's like, I don't know, it's given me a little bit of solace. And yet it's funny because I've shared that before, and sharing it more today, I like really even more than I've talked about this in the past. And this like being 99% sure, it's like, I don't know, can we ever be 100% sure about anything? Maybe, maybe not. I'll let you decide that and what your view on that is. But it's funny how my feelings have changed. I'm really like, no, I'm good. I feel good about this child-free choice. All right. I would love your feedback on this episode. Send me a DM on Instagram. Why don't you give me a follow over on Instagram? It's kids or child free. If you're not doing so already, I'll make sure to include the link in the show notes. And if you're not already following me, give me a follow and then slide into my DMs and let me know what about my story has resonated with you? What questions do you still have that I can answer in future episodes? I would love to know. And I really want to thank you for tuning in and listening to my story. I'm curious how you like this solo episode format as well, relative to the interviews, which of course are fantastic. And I'm definitely going to keep doing them. But do you want to have more solo episodes? And if so, what do you want to hear about? All right, that is all from me. I wish you a beautiful rest of your day, and I will see you back here soon for our next episode.
Okay, now that we've wrapped up today's conversation, this is the part of the episode where I tell you that you need to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. And you really need to do that. And I'm going to tell you why. And that is because one of the big ways that people find and discover new podcasts like this one is through reviews. So if you yourself can go say what you loved about this podcast, why people who are on the fence should tune into the Kids Are Child-Free podcast, that's going to help other people who are also wondering, should I have kids or stay child-free, to discover us. Thank you in advance for doing so. I will be featuring some of the reviews in upcoming episodes, so maybe I'll share yours. You never know. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you back here soon for our next episode.